Who doesn't love a good scar story?
Did I ever show you my scar?
I have this one on the ring finger of my right hand where a squirrel bit me when I was a kid.
It was a squirrel, I think. Or a very small raccoon.
We'll save that story for another day. But as I was saying, we humans celebrate scars. They're marks of survival and healing. We have stories about scarred heroes.
Wicked.
And we're fascinated by the grotesque scars of villains.
Speaking of which, you know how I got these scars?
The most illustrious of scars are battle scars, war wounds acquired during honorable service to one's country. In Stephen Crane's classic novel about the American Civil War, The Red Badge of Courage, the main character is a young private who longs to have a war wound of his own.
He regarded the wounded soldiers in an envious way. He conceived persons with torn bodies to be peculiarly happy. He wished that he too had a wound, a red badge of courage.
Over the course of the story, the grim reality of war erases the young man's boyish dreams of glory. Even though war wounds are frequently a sign of great sacrifice, often they are more tragic than they are prestigious. As I was researching for this video, I ran across images of maimed soldiers from the Civil War, and it called to mind the words of Abraham Lincoln.
War at best is terrible, and this war of ours, in its magnitude and its duration, is one of the most terrible.
With that being said, I want to tell you the remarkable story of a Civil War soldier who survived a horrific war wound and found himself with a battle scar that amazed people who knew him. And it'll amaze you too. His life embodies both the horrors of war and the quintessential, let me tell you how I got this scar story. This is the story of Jacob Miller. I pieced his account together from 2 different interviews he gave and his own memoirs. Jacob did not spare the graphic details of his ordeal, so viewer discretion is advised. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories like this. Let's go.
Oh, glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul is marching on.
In the middle of the American Civil War, a battle was fought in northwest Georgia near Missionary Ridge. It took place on September 19th and 20th, 1863, and it is known as the Battle of Chickamauga. The Union Army of the Cumberland was making an offensive maneuver and was attacked by the Confederate Army of Tennessee. The battle resulted in Union defeat and involved the second highest number of casualties in the Civil War following the Battle of Gettysburg. During the conflict, Jacob Miller, a private in the Union Army, was looking over the breastwork of a fortification when he was struck by a bullet directly in the center of his forehead. In his own words,
"Some Johnny rebel got careless with his old musket and accidentally or otherwise pulled a trigger while the muzzle was pointed my way. I stopped the full charge of lead, consisting of 1 round ball and 3 buckshots, between the eyes passing under the frontal bone, crushing my left eye out of the cavity well. I thought I was done for."
For most people, such a wound would have ended their life. But for Jacob, this was the beginning of an amazing journey of survival.
After being shot, I was left for dead when my company fell back from that position. When I came to my senses sometime after, I found I was in the rear of the Confederate line. I felt my wound. I found my left eye out of its place and tried to place it back, but I had to move the crushed bone back as near together as I could. I got the eye in its proper place, then bandaged it the best I could with my bandana. I could hear the firing not far away, some of the bullets even striking near where I was sitting.
Determined not to become a prisoner, Jacob got up using his gun as a staff and made his way through the Confederate troops and off the field of battle.
I suppose I was so covered with blood that those that I met did not notice that I was a Yank.
Jacob continued walking until he struck an old byroad, which he followed.
By this time my head was swelled so bad it shut my eyes, and I could see to get along only by raising the lid of my right eye with my finger and looking ahead, then going on till I ran afoul of something, then would look again, and so on.
At length, he became so exhausted that he laid down by the side of the road.
Soon it became dark and the battle was over for the day. I hoped someone would come my way, and after it seemed to me ages, I heard someone coming my way. I pulled my eye open and saw, to my great joy, that it was two men with a stretcher. I let myself be known to them, and they came to me. I got on the stretcher and was carried to the field hospital. A hospital nurse came and put a wet bandage over my wound and around my head and gave me a canteen of water. The surgeons examined my wound and decided it was best not to operate on me and give me more pain, as they said I couldn't live very long. So the nurse took me back into the tent. At last, I became unconscious. That was indeed a mercy to me after what I had passed through up to that time. The next morning, the doctors came around to make a list of the wounded and said they were sending all the wounded to Chattanooga, Tennessee. But they told me I was wounded too bad to be moved.
The doctors assured Jacob that if he was left behind and taken prisoner, he could be exchanged later. But the thought of being a prisoner of war motivated Jacob.
After the doctor had gone from the tent, I crawled out of it and went to the spring, filled my canteen, wet my head, and washed as much blood off my face as best I could, because I had made up my mind that I would not be taken a prisoner as long as I had strength to drag one foot after another. I would rather die trying to get to Chattanooga than be captured. I kept going as long as I had nerve left to take a step. Then I lay down under a tree beside the road to rest and to water the bandage. After a short time, I got to my feet and started again, but did not get as far as I did the first time, so I lay longer the second. The third attempt soon ended as I found it was useless for me to struggle on, so I made my way to the side of the road and fell exhausted.
Jacob hadn't been there long when ambulance wagons taking the wounded to Chattanooga began to pass by.
I heard someone call to me asking me to tell them if I were alive, but I could not even raise my hand. At last a driver slacked up and asked me, so I told him I could not walk any further. He drove to the side of the road, picked me up, told me a man had died and put me in his place.
Once inside the wagon, Jacob lost consciousness. When Jacob awoke, he struggled to remember what had happened.
I realized I was in a building among a lot more that were knocked out, as I had been. I heard a group talking, so I arose to a sitting position and wet my head and eye. Then I pried the lid loose and looked at them. Who should I see but my messmates? I turned my face from them in order to compose myself and then growled, "You fellows cut out your noise." They came back at me. We sparred a bit. Then I gave a loud laugh and said, "Sled, how did you get here?" He looked at me and exclaimed, "Look, there's Miller's blood ghost." And the joke was on me. We got together and compared accounts. I gave them some of my grub that I could not eat. In a short while, an officer came in and called for attention. He commanded all who could walk to start to the river and cross the pontoon bridge to a hospital. We were to be treated and taken to Nashville. I told the boys that I could walk, but could not open my eye, that if they would see for me, we could manage.
Jacob and his companions made their way to the bridge, but found a long line of troops and artillery crossing it. It was almost sundown before they were able to go over.
When we got up on the bank, Sled yelled, "There's Gus the cook with our wagon." Gus was our company team master. We just felt like we could kiss the cook and hug all four of his mules, for we knew we were in good hands. Cook brought out a camp kettle full of water, and getting into the wagon, brought out a white shirt that he tore into strips with which to bandage my wound. After fixing two other boys' wounds, he made some good coffee and fried sow belly and hardtack. I woke up enough for a drink of coffee, and then I was gone. At daybreak, I was roused by the comrades placing a wet cloth over my wound. I could open my eye very well as the swelling had gone down a bit. I asked if breakfast was ready, the reply being, "Very soon. Get up and shake your bones a little." I ate a little but drank 2 cans of coffee. Cook said that he had found a hospital with a staff of surgeons fixing the wounded, and that our turn would come about noon. So we bid the teamster goodbye and went to get our wounds tended to. That was the first time my wound was washed and dressed by a surgeon.
After this, Jacob and his companions received supplies: a few crackers, some sugar, coffee, salt, and a cake of soap. Then they were sent by wagon to Bridgeport, Alabama. Jacob remembers the wagon ride being painful.
The jolting hurt my head so badly I could not stand it, so I had to get out. My comrades got out with me, and we went on foot.
They walked 60 miles to Bridgeport, taking 4 days to get there. During the journey, Jacob was finally able to open his right eye without using his fingers. They arrived in Bridgeport and caught a train to Nashville, Tennessee. The exertion of the journey and the pain from the wound had finally taken their toll on Jacob. He remembers laying down in the train car in a state of utter exhaustion.
We got into a common soldier's sleeping car, a cattle car. We lay down on the floor with the grease, straw, and oh well, it was softer than the naked boards. I was soon out of my troubles for the time being, and did not even know when the train started. The sand had run out with me for the time being.
To his surprise, Jacob woke up in a bathtub of warm water in a hospital in Nashville.
The attendants had my clothes off. Then I found I was in a bathtub. One of them was holding me up while the other took the bandages off and cleaned the clotted blood from my hair and face. Then my wound was rebandaged, and the rest of my body was washed. They let out the water, put more in, and sponged me again. The next put clean underwear on me and put me in a clean cot where I could lay my bruised head on a good soft pillow. I thought if heaven was as good as that, I was ready to go.
He was transferred from there to a hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, then to another in New Albany, Indiana. Jacob wanted the bullet to be removed.
In all the hospitals I was in, I begged the surgeons to operate on my head, but they all refused.
After 9 months of suffering, Jacob finally got 2 doctors to agree to operate on him. They were unsuccessful in removing the musket ball though, because the bone had partially healed over the entry wound. But as time went on, his body did its best to heal itself.
17 years after I was wounded, a buckshot dropped out of my wound, and 31 years after, 2 pieces of lead came out. When I reached home, I found father and mother had both passed away, so I went to work for farmers or whatever I could do, but I had a sorry time on account of my wound. My left eye is blind. The wound is open, and pus discharges continually, so much so that I cannot go into any society for fear of offending someone. I have barely made enough to live on all the years since, and could not get ahead. At present, I have no visible income but what Uncle Sam gives me. The government is good to me and gives me $40 per month pension.
As an 82-year-old, Jacob wrote the following.
If it was possible for me to meet the deluded enemy that shot me, I should congratulate him on being a center shot, for that gives me the name of center shot. I am proud of my wound and my service, and am glad I was a small link in that great chain of soldiery that brought back Old Glory without a single star missing.
Jacob lived to be 88 years old. I've found one story from his later years that showcases his pride in his scar. It comes from the Herald News on June 13th, 1911. It talks about Jacob attending an encampment of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a veterans organization for soldiers who had served in the Union Army. According to the story, the veterans were going to tour the Brooklyn Navy Yard when Jacob became separated from his companions. He thus received no passport to the yards, and when he reached the gates, was challenged by the sentry. He explained his story, and finally, lifting his cap, said, "Won't this do to show that I was in the war?" The sentry immediately saluted and declared that Mr. Miller carried a passport that none could gainsay. Scars are history that we carry with us, as individuals like Jacob Miller, and as a society. As I pieced together Jacob's story, I was reminded of the Mason-Dixon line, which still separates the southern and northern United States. In the words of Robert Love Taylor, 24th Governor of Tennessee,
There it is, a great crimson scar of honor across the face of the grandest country God ever made. There it is, and there it will remain, the dividing line between cold bread and hot biscuit.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. I want to hear the craziest scar stories you know. Share yours in the comments.